Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to talk about the speaker identification and we are going to train a CNN based model. And for the features, we used a Melspectogram to feed this CNN. We know that most of the time the CNN are used for kind of image classification related task, and most of the time it do work with the images. So what we do, we created a Melspectogram of an audio signal which is a speech signal, and we feed that speech signal to CNN. And what is a Melspectogram? It is a visual representation of audio frequencies that is wrapped and aligned with the human hearing perception. So it is more closer to the hearing perception, which makes it more perceptually relevant for the speech processing tasks than our regular spectrogram. So if we have to use a regular spectrogram, it is more relevant to use Melspectogram for audio frequencies because it is more closer to the speech processing. We add it with the unsqueeze 0. We add a channel dimension to that Melspectogram, which will convert it to a 4D tensor. So we get 1 and a number of mels and time frames. So we get this tensor, and which makes it more common format for feeding into the convolutional neural network. So we are using a convolutional neural network to train over speaker identification model. So it is better suited to feed a Melspectogram, and we add a channel perception to this. So it is not now a proper tensor to ready to be fed to the convolutional neural network. So that is often expected input data format for channel dimensions like images, RGB channels. For images, we have a RGB channel. So similarly, we have a tensor with the channel information in that. Otherwise, it is just a 2D vector, but we convert it with the channel information. The Melspectograms are important for speaker recognition because they are effectively capture the speaker specific spectral characteristics of voice. So if we have a speech, so Melspectogram will effectively capture the speaker specific characteristics. So it will discard the irrelevant details and provide the more compact informative feature representation compared to the raw audio waveforms. So how we're gonna do that? The second part which comes to is a data set. What kind of dataset are we going to use? We are going to use the Libri speech dataset, a small fraction of it to train. Actually, if we try to train on the full dataset, it is very huge and require GPU to train in on that. But just to check a proof of concept, we just get a small fraction of the Libri speech dataset and we train on that. How we get this dataset? We can simply grab a dataset from this URL, and we have train clean and then dev clean dataset. We can grab using this command, wget command, and we will get this folder. And we are telling it, we just create two directories, and we download the dataset inside that directories. And after that, we just unzip it with this command. And when we unzip both of these, we will get two folders for validation and testing and training dataset. We can either use different folders for that, but for this tutorial, we will stick with the Libri speech train folder. So we will only getting the data from this dataset. So if you want to visualize what a spectrogram looks like, so I have created a video which is audio denoising. We talked about the spectrograms in there, but here is an image of a spectrogram from a research paper, which I'm going to talk about. We get this spectrogram, we just like an image. We feed that to a convolution layer, then a max pooling layer, then a convolution layer, then we have another max pooling layer, and then a dense and dropout layer, then dense layer and soft max, and we get the speaker labels. So this is an overall structure of CNN model which created in this paper. This paper was published in 2016 in IEEE International Workshop on Machine Learning for Signal Processing. The title of this paper is Speaker Identification and Clustering Using Convolutional Neural Network. So it is very relevant to our current today's code. So we talked about this. First of all, what is a speaker identification? Speaker identification refers to the task of inferring the speaker's identity of a new utterance given a set of non-voice models. So we have a set of voice models and we have a new utterance of a speech, and we want to know which speaker is speaking that speech. On the other hand, speaker clustering, it describes the task of telling who spoke when for a sequence of utterance. So for example, we have a speech where multiple speakers are speaking, and we want to know which speaker are speaking currently. So that is kind of a problem, speaker clustering. It is also called speaker diarization. So speaker clustering is also called a speaker diarization, which means to segment into a speaker specific segments, and clustering of these segments into speaker specific groups is approached simultaneously, usually build upon the same method used for a speaker identification. So what we are going to talk about in this paper, they are using the MFCC features along with, they said that the speaker clustering, however, is still common to use handcrafted processing chains such as MFCC features and GMM-based models. So most of the time, it is an ancient technique which use MFCC feature along with the GMM-based model, and it gives a promising results. In this paper, they use a simple spectrogram as input to a CNN and study the optimum design for those network for speaker identification and clustering. So we are going to replicate this code, which is a very similar to feed a Melspectogram to a CNN model to see the speaker identification and clustering problems. And furthermore, they elaborated on the question how to transfer a network trained for a speaker identification to speaker clustering. So for example, they train a model for a specific task, for a speaker identification task, and then they transfer this to create as embeddings. What is an embedding? Embedding is a numerical representation of what a neural network get a features. Finally, the features that a neural network gets, it is sometimes called embedding, and that is a most common technique to be used as a clustering problem. What they use as a dataset, they use a timid dataset in this to train a speaker identification and clustering problem. So traditionally, speaker identification task has been approached using Gaussian mixture models, which is a GMMs, and mel-frequency substance coefficients, which is a MFCCs. MFCCs are most common features that are used for speech recognition as well as speaker identification and speaker derivation problems. So they used with the vectors like I vectors to form a compact fixed length and maximally speaker specific representation of an address. So for example, they want to create a speaker specific utterance, they use I vector kind of techniques usually, but now we are shifting to a deep neural network. But in today's talk, we are also going to create our code related to the deep neural network. They also talked some of the literature related work, and inside that this is a paper that demonstrates using different type of deep neural network models and how the spectrograms are spectrograms can be used as an input to diverse audio recognition tasks, including the speaker identification. So they also provide a good reference how the spectrograms could be used for a speaker relevant task. And then we have another paper which talks about training a SIMS that deep neural network to directly compare two voice segments discriminatively. So what this network do, they learn to discriminate between two inputs. So basically, if we feed two inputs, they basically learns how to discriminate between two inputs. So that is a common problem. Like for example, the FaceNet model for a face recognition task also is a kind of SIMS network which use our triplet loss function and learn for a discriminative features. Instead of using a feature learning capabilities like a CNN, they rely on a MFCC features. And there is also another paper which talks about the idea of speaker discriminative training and drive speaker specific features from hidden layer of a neural network. So they train a neural network for a classification related task. They cut out the last layer and use a hidden layer which is a feature layer, and just three layers which they subsequently feed into the GMM or HMM system for a speaker clustering. So that is another paper that do this kind of approach. So we can also go with that. The idea of speaker embedding is further explored by this paper, and with a non-convolutional neural network and with a 61,440 dimensional super vector obtained from a Gaussian mixture universal black group model. So this is a GMM UBM model as an input. In contrast, we propose to learn the feature directly from spectrogram by using CNN trained for a speaker identification. So yeah, we did that as well. So feature is learned directly from a CNN trained speaker identification and then use one of the post convolution layer as feature representation. So in this today's code, we did not created the speaker derivation problem. We leave that for another talk. But today we are going to use for a speaker identification problem. So the input of the network is constructed as follows. We computed a Melspectogram with 120 elements in a frequency direction for each sentence of the dataset in the Python library Librosa. So yes, we use the Librosa library, and they have 16 kilohertz sampling rate, and almost 1024 sample FFT window length, and 160 samples as a hop length. Then they perform a dynamic range compression of the spectrogram by applying the element-wise function. And the network is trained using mini batch gradient descent. They trained the network with a mini batch gradient descent, and the batch size is 128, and cross entropy loss function. So these are the main points that we fetch from this paper. Although they use the timid dataset, but we are using LibriSpeech dataset. We can also use our timid dataset, but for this tutorial, we are just going to stick with the LibriSpeech dataset. So let's connect over this Google Colab notebook and see how we start doing it. Once we have our dataset, there is a speaker.txt file. This file contains an information of every speaker, their gender, the subset where they belongs to, the minutes of speech, the name of that speaker. So these are the information that we get from a speakers.txt file. After that, we prepare a class for speaker dataset. Inside that function, what we are going to do, we are passing an instance of a dataset which we grabbed from Torch utils dataset, and we find all the flag files. This is another important point to remember, that In this dataset, the flag files are used instead of wave files. So we fetch all the flag files. We will get the max length. Then we will fetch a speaker set. This is just to get the ID of a speaker, because the name of the files contain the first letters which are ID of a speaker, just like this number. Then we have a length function, and then we have a get item function. How we grab a single item? We will get an ID and we fetch a file path for that specific speaker ID. Then we will use torch audio function. This is imported torch audio. We are going to use this package, and inside the torch audio we use a load function and we pass a file path, and this will return a waveform and SR information. We use the waveform and we use a mean. We convert it to mono. This line will simply convert a stereo audio file to a mono file. Then we will just compare that if it is greater than a max length that we specified in our class. This is a max length and this is a max length, which is just 48 kilohertz. And if it is greater than that, we will just truncate it. So if we have a speech longer than that, we will just truncate it. If it is shorter than that, we will pad it. So that's simple. We will get a consistent same length dataset. Then we compute a Melspectogram using torch audio, and we use transforms and then Melspectogram. We provide a sample rate. We get the sample rate from here with the torch audio dot load function. It returns a waveform and SR, which is a sampling rate. We pass the sampling rate to the Melspectogram function, and then we number of mels that we want to use, which we are using a 64 for the sake of simplicity. So now we have a simple 64 length mels, and then we pass the waveform to compute the Melspectogram. Once we get the Melspectogram, we will log it, and then we extract the ID of a speaker. Then we get the label from it and we return these two information. We will add a unsqueeze. This is a channel information which we just pass it, and we return it a Melspectogram and a label. This is a well suited features for CNN to take as an input. Then we use this class and we pass a file path. This is a folder path for our dataset. We calculate the length. Then we split it into 80% for the training, 10% for validation, and remaining 10% for the testing purposes. So now we have train test split to train our machine learning model. Then we will get with the train dataset and validation dataset and test dataset. We will randomly split our dataset into a train, validation, and test. Then we use a data loader function. Inside the data loader, we will pass our train dataset, the batch size which we want to use, and shuffle we pass simply as a true parameter. And then we have our three train, validation, and test loader functions. Now we are going to create over first of all, let's see a simple CNN model. For a simple CNN, we just pass a convolution layer and a ReLU function, then max pooling, and then another convolution layer and that's max pooling. After that, we just simply adaptive average pooling layer and linear layer, and then for the forward pass, we simply do this. This is the way we create a simple neural network. We pass a number of classes and these number of classes are simply dataset dot speaker set. We use across entropy loss as a criteria, and the optimizer is simply the Adam optimizer, and for the learning rate we simply use 0.001. Then we simply train the model for let's say 3 epochs, and we can again train for 10 epochs, and here you will see the model will quickly saturate. So this is kind of just like the model is overfitting. So this kind of model will not suit in our case. We will replace it with the better information. So the confusion matrix and classification report, we if we create a classification report, it will look like this. And what is a classification report? Basically, a confusion matrix or a classification report are evaluated on test set. In this case, likely validation set, as it called a test accuracy. Overfitting manifests not so much in test performance itself, which might still be decent, but more of the gap between the training and test performance and trends during the training. How we can simply use these functions to um, compute over overall accuracy and number of unique labels if we want to figure it out, and generate a classification report with that classification report function. So this is simply imported from the sklearn matrices and classification report and confusion matrix. So now we have this. If you want to understand better about an overfitting, overfitting is usually means that model performs well on training data, but it poorly do unseen data like validation or test dataset. In classification report terms, this usually means high training accuracy but lower validation test accuracy. So if this is happening, that you are getting a high training accuracy but you are getting a low validation or test accuracy, it usually means that you are doing an overfitting on your dataset. So based on the training log, it strongly suggests overfitting. The training loss decrease rapidly and approaching to zero, while the training accuracy quickly reach 100%. So this is quickly an overfitting. However, the validation loss after an initial decrease starts to plateau and even slightly increase in later epochs, and validation accuracy around 94 to 95%, which doesn't consistently improve. Okay, so how to overcome the overfitting? To overcome the overfitting in a speaker identification model, we can try some techniques. First of all is a data augmentation. What a data augmentation do? It increase the variability in the training data. So what you do, you increase the samples of your data set. You add a random noise to it. You will create multiple copies of a same input with a little bit of variation. So with the help of little bit variation, then you do a regularization, which add a penalty to a model to prevent it from becoming too complex and memorizing the training data. The core idea of overfitting is to just memorizing the training data rather than learning good features from it. So we want to prevent that happening. We can also add a dropout randomly neurons during the training to reduce the network independence and improve the generalization. We can also add a batch normalization, which is activation within each layer to stabilize training and potentially improve the generalization. We can reduce the model complexity if the model is too complex for amount of data. Simplifying it can reduce the overfitting. Early stopping, if we monitor that validation loss stop training when it starts to increase, even if training loss is still decreasing, we can just stop it for further epochs. We can also increase the training data. More data generally helps generalization. So if we add more data to our training, it will also help to remove overfitting. So let's create a new model. Here what we are doing, we are adding a batch normalization and we are creating new layers. Then we add a batch normalization, then simply a ReLU and max pooling layer, and then we are also adding a dropout layer. So this way we are using 1, 2, 3 kind of things, and then we are getting an adaptive average pooling layer, and after that simply we are getting these embeddings, and after that we are adding a dropout layer, and we fetch this embedding layer and a classification. Classify is simply a linear layer out of it. So the learning rate is still 0.001, and we are creating this new model, and the number of speakers, we provide the number of speakers, and the criteria is cross entropy loss, and the optimizer is still the Adam optimizer, and we provide the learning rate and weight decay 1 raised to power minus 5. So loss function, you may think that why a simple classification model with cross entropy loss can learn discriminative features. Basically, a simple cross entropy loss discriminative features, like why don't we use a triplet loss function? So we are going to talk about that. The shortest explanation, while cross entropy loss is directly for classification to perform well at classifying speakers. The model must learn features that are discriminative between different speakers. So it is also learning. We have a fixed number of speakers, and we want to learn to discriminate between those speakers. So cross entropy loss is well suited for that kind of classification. The classification layer and cross entropy loss together force the model to push embedding of different speaker apart in the feature space. So if we have a feature space, the cross entropy loss force the model to apart in the feature space and pull embeddings of the same speaker closer. So that's how the cross entropy loss will help. Essentially, good classification performance implies the learning of discriminative speaker embeddings, even if it's not explicitly enforced like in triplet loss function. Triplet loss directly optimize the embedding space for separation, but classification indirectly achieve a similar goal when the classes are distinct entities like speakers. So the point to consider, the task goal. It is speaker identification, right? So the close set, which means that we have a non-speaker before. So the speaker verification and recognition, open set, we are comparing speakers. So we have to clear, do we know the speakers at the time of training and the validation, or we may expose our model to unknown speakers as well, which dataset we do not have at the time of training. So these two questions has to be answered. Number of speakers. Does it scale well with the larger number of speakers? New speaker at test time. Will the system encounter speaker not seen during training? Embedding usage. Is the goal to get embedding for downstream tasks beyond just classification? So are we just not using this trained model for classification? Are we going to get the embeddings out of it and use it for speaker derivation as well? So that is another point to be remembered. Performance bottleneck. Is classification accuracy saturating? So when you are doing a classification, so is that accuracy is saturating? Then right time to moving to a triplet loss is potentially a Siemens network or similar, just like we do in a face recognition. When your primary goal shifts from speaker identification to speaker verification, comparing if two utterances are from same speaker, or open set speaker recognition, where identifying speakers from potentially changing a larger dataset. If your classification accuracy with cross entropy loss starts to plateau and you want embeddings that generalize better to unseen speakers, or if you need to perform speaker similarity comparison directly, then switching to triplet loss related architecture becomes beneficial, as it directly optimizes the embedding space for speaker discrimination rather than just classification within a fixed set. But for this, we just stick with that. And we will just simply create a training loop, and inside the training loop we are using an optimizer. Then we get the output from a model, we create a loss function, and then we pass a backward pass and optimizer, then we compute this loss, and similarly we compute the training loss, training accuracy, and similar accuracies. We then validate the model to calculate the validation loss and validation accuracy, and we print for each epochs the training loss and training accuracy. Finally, we plot these information to better visualize what's happened in training accuracy and validation accuracy. For quick demonstration, I just run first of all for just 5 epochs. Here you can see it go with this kind of information with this kind of graph. And this 5 epochs progress shows a continued learning which is positive, but both training loss is decreasing and training accuracy is increasing as expected. Importantly, validation loss also generally decrease and validation accuracy increase significantly in the last epochs. So we can save this model with simply torch.save, and it will create a checkpoint. We can load the model later on and continue training like this. With this line, we simply create an instance of a model and we load the previous checkpoint, and we can again do the epochs. So it will help us. So we can train it later. But if you do training again and again and again, and you see this kind of graphs, it means your model start overfitting and you have to quit and go to the last checkpoint. Okay, so these things you have to consider. Finally, you plot the similarly manner the confusion matrix, and this is a confusion matrix and classification report, and we can also plot this speaker distribution in dataset. So that's how we train our simple speaker identification model.